When a rich man offers you his worthless daughter as a cruel joke, you're supposed to say no. You're supposed to ride away, swallowing the insult, because that's what a man with no money and no name does in the Wyoming Territory of 1867. But Jacob Thorne looked into the quiet eyes of the woman his own father had just called plain prairie dirt, and he saw something else. He saw the answer to a prayer he'd never even had the courage to speak out loud. What happens when the greatest gift of your life comes disguised as the worst punishment imaginable? You're about to find out. Blood dripped from Jacob's knuckles. It hit the saloon floor, one drop at a time, sizzling in the dust. The man on the ground groaned, his nose pointing in a direction it was never meant to go. The heat in Dusty Creek was a physical thing, an oven door swinging open. But the rage inside Jacob Thorne burned hotter. He'd just been called worthless, again. And it was the last time. "Take it back," Jacob growled, his voice low and dangerous. "About my mama." Pete the bartender, a man whose face was a road map of saloon fights and bad decisions, just kept wiping a glass with a dirty rag. "Your mama was a saint, Jacob. Don't let fools get under your skin." Easy for him to say. Pete had a roof over his head. Jacob had 40 acres of rock, a cabin he'd built with his own 2 hands, and 20 head of cattle that were more bone than beef. He had more pride than pennies, and in this world, that was a dangerous combination. He picked up his hat, slapped the dust from it, and settled it on his head. His shirt was torn. His boots were begging for mercy. He looked exactly like what he was, a man on the edge of giving up, but not today. "I'm riding out to the Hartwell place," Jacob announced, his shoulders squared. Pete stopped wiping the glass. The whole saloon went quiet. You could hear a fly buzzing by the window. "You sure about that, son? Samuel Hartwell eats men like you for breakfast, and he doesn't bother to spit out the bones." "Maybe so," Jacob said, tossing his last few coins on the bar. "But it's time I asked for what I want, instead of just waiting for the world to give me what it thinks I deserve." The ride to the Hartwell Ranch was 3 hours of nothing but sky and grass, a green ocean that stretched to forever. Jacob's horse, Copper, was a good bay gelding who knew his job, picking his way around prairie dog holes, while his rider rehearsed the most important speech of his life. "Mr. Hartwell," Jacob said to the wind, "I know I'm not much, but I love your daughter Margaret, and I'd spend my life proving I'm worthy of her." The words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Pathetic. What could he possibly offer a woman like Margaret Hartwell? She was sunshine and wildfire, raised in a house with servants and silk dresses. He'd danced with her once at a church social, just once. But the way she'd laughed, the way she hadn't pulled her hand away, that had to mean something, didn't it? Then the ranch appeared on the horizon. It wasn't a ranch. It was a kingdom. The main house was a 2-story giant with a porch that wrapped all the way around and windows made of real glass. Barns, corrals, and outbuildings spread out like a small town. And cattle, hundreds of them, dotting the hillsides. This was power. This was what it meant to be Samuel Hartwell. Jacob's stomach turned to lead. 2 ranch hands, big men with arms like tree trunks, stopped their work to stare as he rode up the long drive. Their eyes took in his patched clothes, his worn saddle, his cheap horse. Their judgment was a physical weight. "You lost, mister?" one of them called out, a sneer playing on his lips. "Here to see Mr. Hartwell," Jacob said, his voice steadier than he felt. "On business." The ranch hand laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Business? What kind of business could a saddle tramp like you have with the boss?" Before Jacob could answer, the front door of the mansion opened. And there she was, Margaret. Her auburn hair was fire in the afternoon sun. Her dress was the color of the sky. For a split second, Jacob completely forgot how to breathe. The world just stopped. "Jacob!" Her voice was a mix of surprise and worry. "What are you doing here?" He swung down from Copper, his legs feeling like they were made of jelly. He forced himself to walk toward the porch, trying to project a confidence that was a complete lie. "I came to speak with your father. Papa's in his office, but Jacob, maybe this isn't a good time." "Margaret, who is that at my door?" The voice that boomed from inside the house could have curdled milk. It was a voice used to giving orders and being obeyed without question. Samuel Hartwell appeared in the doorway. He was a mountain of a man, tall and broad, with a mane of silver hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. He looked at Jacob not like he was a man, but like he was an insect, something to be scraped off a boot. "Papa, this is Jacob Thorne," Margaret said, her voice a little shaky. "I know who he is," Hartwell cut her off. "The question is, what is he doing on my land?" This was it, the moment of truth. Hat in hand, Jacob stepped forward. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I've come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage." The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret gasped. The ranch hands froze, their mouths hanging open. Even the chickens in the yard seemed to hold their breath. Samuel Hartwell's face was a mask of stone. He looked Jacob up and down, a slow, deliberate inspection that took in every patch on his jeans, every scuff on his boots, every sign of a man who fought the earth for a living and mostly lost. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. It was something much, much colder. "Come inside," Hartwell said. "We need to talk." But Jacob knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this wasn't going to be a talk. It was going to be an execution. The inside of the Hartwell house was another world. Polished wood floors gleamed. Furniture carved from dark, heavy wood sat like silent kings in every room. Oil paintings, real ones, hung on the walls. The air itself smelled different. It smelled of money. Hartwell led Jacob into an office lined with so many books, Jacob felt dizzy. He sat behind a desk the size of a small wagon and gestured for Jacob to stand there, like a schoolboy called in for a caning. "So," Hartwell began, not even looking up from a ledger he was writing in, "you want to marry my daughter?" "Yes, sir," Jacob said, his mouth as dry as a desert creek bed. "I know I don't have much, but—" "Stop." Hartwell held up a hand, the pen never pausing. "Before you waste my time telling me what you don't have, let's hear what you do have. Let's make a list." Jacob shifted his weight. "Well, I own 40 acres, good grazing land, up north. Built the cabin myself. It's tight against the winter. I have 20 head of cattle. A good horse." "Debt?" Hartwell asked, the pen scratching. "No, sir. Paid for. Everything I have is mine. Family? My parents passed from the fever when I was 16. No brothers, no sisters." Hartwell finally looked up. His eyes were like chips of ice. "So, to summarize, you are alone in this world. You own 40 acres of dirt and 20 cows. And you believe this is a fair trade for my daughter, Margaret." The words were like fists. Hearing it laid out so plainly, so cruelly, it was worse than Jacob had ever imagined. "I know it's not much, but—" "It's not much, boy," Hartwell interrupted, a cold smile spreading across his face. "It's nothing. Less than nothing. Do you have any idea what my daughter is worth? The dowry that comes with a Hartwell bride could buy and sell your pathetic little ranch 10 times over." Heat flooded Jacob's face. "She's worth everything to me, sir." "Everything to you is nothing to the world." Hartwell slammed his pen down. "My daughter will marry a man of substance. A man with land, with cattle, with a future. Not some saddle tramp who smells of sweat and desperation." Jacob's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wanted to hit this man. He wanted to wipe that smug, cruel smile right off his face. But that would solve nothing. "I may not have money," Jacob said, his voice shaking with the effort of control. "But I am a hard worker. I would treat Margaret like a queen. I would never raise a hand to her. I would never speak a harsh word. I would—" "You'd what? Love her?" Hartwell let out a laugh. It was a terrible sound, completely without humor. "Love doesn't patch a leaky roof, boy. Love doesn't buy medicine when a baby is burning with fever. Love is a fantasy for fools who can't afford reality." Through the office window, Jacob could see a figure working in the kitchen garden. A woman in a faded brown dress, her hair pulled back in a simple, severe bun. She was kneeling, tending to the vegetables with a quiet focus. It wasn't Margaret. He'd forgotten Margaret even had a sister. Constance. A quiet, shadowy figure who was always just there, in the background. never speaking, never drawing attention. I would find a way, Jacob said, his eyes still on the woman in the garden. A man can do amazing things when he has the right reason. Can he now? Hartwell leaned back, studying Jacob like a bug under a magnifying glass. You speak of love and hard work. But what of worth? Tell me, boy, what makes you think you are worthy of any woman, let alone my daughter? The question was a knife, twisting in a wound Jacob had carried his whole life. What did make him worthy? He was ordinary, uneducated, poor. He was just another man trying to scratch a living from a hard land. But then he thought of Margaret's smile, the feeling of her hand in his. That had to count for something. It just had to. I am an honest man, Jacob said, his voice gaining strength. I keep my word. I don't drink to excess or gamble away my pay. I help my neighbors. I fear God. So does my horse, Hartwell sneered. That doesn't make you special. It makes you average. Shame burned in Jacob's gut. The man was right. Everything he said was right. He was nothing. But then he remembered something else. He remembered watching Margaret at that church social. He remembered the way she'd hummed a little tune to herself when she thought no one was listening. He remembered how she was kind to the old ladies, even when they were gossiping. He remembered she read books, real books, with complicated ideas. Maybe I'm not special, Jacob said, a fire igniting in his chest. But I love her. I mean, I really love her. Not just her face or her father's money. I love the person she is, and I would spend every day of my life trying to make her happy. Hartwell was silent for a long, long time. He just stared at Jacob, his icy eyes seeming to look right through him, weighing and measuring every part of his soul. Just when Jacob was sure he was about to be thrown out, Hartwell spoke. You know what? He said slowly. You've convinced me. Jacob's heart soared. It was a miracle. Sir, I'm going to give you one of my daughters in marriage. Relief washed over Jacob so powerfully he felt weak. Thank you, sir. I promise you won't regret, but not Margaret. The words were a physical blow. The air rushed from Jacob's lungs. The world tilted, the fancy office blurring at the edges. Sir? My other daughter, Hartwell said, and now the smile on his face was one of pure, venomous pleasure. Constance, she's 23, plain as prairie dirt, so shy she can barely look a man in the eye. I've been trying to marry her off for years, but nobody wants damaged goods. Jacob's mind was reeling. Constance, the woman in the garden, the shadow. I don't understand. It's simple, Hartwell explained, clearly enjoying every second of Jacob's confusion. You're a worthless man who wants a wife. I have a worthless daughter I want to get rid of. It's a perfect match. You can have her. I'll even throw in a small dowry, a couple $100. Consider it an act of charity for both of you. The cruelty was breathtaking. This wasn't a marriage offer. It was a disposal. He was being offered the family trash. Two unwanted things lumped together to be forgotten. And what if I say no? Jacob asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Hartwell's smile was as cold as a grave. Then you ride out of here with nothing, same as you came. But if you say yes, you get a wife, and you get enough money to turn that pitiful excuse for a ranch into something that might actually survive the winter. A fair trade, I think. Through the window, Jacob saw the woman in the garden, Constance, look up toward the house. For a split second, their eyes met through the glass. She looked away instantly, but not before Jacob saw the expression on her face. It wasn't hope. It was a deep, bone-weary resignation. The look of someone who had been hurt so many times that they no longer expected anything else. And in that moment, Jacob felt something shift inside him. It wasn't love. It wasn't pity. It was a flicker of recognition. He knew that look. He saw it in the mirror every single morning. Well, boy, Hartwell's voice cut through his thoughts. What's it going to be? Take the scraps I'm offering, or ride away with your empty pockets and your worthless pride. Jacob's hand trembled as he reached for the glass of water Hartwell pushed across the massive desk. The crystal felt impossibly fragile, like it could shatter from the tension in the room. Hartwell's monstrous proposal hung in the air, a foul smoke that burned his eyes and choked his throat. I need a moment to think, Jacob managed to say. Think? Hartwell laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Boy, this isn't a negotiation. It's a rescue mission. I'm rescuing you from poverty, and I'm rescuing myself from the burden of an unmarriageable daughter. Take it or leave it. Now. Jacob looked out the window again. At Constance. She was pulling weeds, her movements slow and deliberate. She treated the soil, the plants, with a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with the harshness of this place, this family. He saw one of the ranch hands swagger past the garden. The man said something crude. Jacob couldn't hear the words, but he saw the way Constance flinched, the way she pulled into herself, making herself smaller, trying to become invisible. And a hot, protective anger flared in Jacob's chest. She seems like a good person, Jacob said, choosing his words with care. Good? Hartwell snorted. She's useful. I'll grant you that. Cooks like a professional chef. Cleans the house like a demon is chasing her. Never talks back. Never causes a lick of trouble. She's a perfect servant. But she's 23 and unmarried. In this territory, that tells you everything you need to know. Jacob watched as Constance stood up, brushing the dirt from her worn skirt. Even from this distance, he could see a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. It wasn't the dazzling fire of Margaret, but it was something else, a kind of deep, still water. What's wrong with her? Jacob asked, the question surprising even himself. Hartwell seemed genuinely confused. Wrong? Nothing's wrong with her, not exactly. She's just nothing. A plain face, a quiet voice. There's no spark, no fire. Margaret has the kind of spirit that makes men fight duels. Constance just exists. The words were like stones, and Jacob felt every one of them. He knew what it was like to be dismissed, to be looked through as if you weren't there. He'd lived his whole life in that shadow. Can I meet her? Jacob asked, his voice suddenly firm. Can I speak with her before I decide? Hartwell's eyebrows shot up. You want to court the damaged goods? Most men would just take the money and be grateful for the warm body that comes with it. Most men aren't me, Jacob said. A flicker of something, maybe respect, maybe just amusement, crossed Hartwell's face. Fair enough. He stood and walked to the window, cupping his hands around his mouth. Constance, get in here, girl. Someone wants to meet you. Jacob watched the young woman's expression change. Calm focus instantly became a mask of anxiety. She looked toward the house like a rabbit, hearing the click of a hunter's rifle. But she didn't hesitate. She wiped her hands on her apron, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the porch with a steady, determined pace. Remember, Hartwell muttered as her footsteps sounded on the porch. She's not Margaret. Don't expect poetry and sunshine. The door opened, and Constance stepped into the room. And Samuel Hartwell was a blind fool. Up close, her face wasn't plain at all. It was quiet. Her mouth had a gentle, sad curve to it. Her eyes were a deep, intelligent brown, the color of rich earth after a spring rain. They held a depth that made you feel like you were looking into a well that went on forever. Constance, this is Jacob Thorne, Hartwell said with a dismissive wave. He's come calling. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Surprise, hope, fear. It was all there, a flash of lightning before she quickly looked down at her clasped hands. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Thorne. Her voice was soft, but it was clear. It had a musical quality, like distant wind chimes. She didn't stutter or stammer. She spoke with the careful precision of someone who had learned that words were dangerous, and it was best to use as few of them as possible. The pleasure is all mine, Miss Hartwell, Jacob replied, removing his hat. He had to break the suffocating tension her father was creating. Your father, well, I was just admiring your garden. Those tomatoes are the best I've seen in the whole territory. A tiny smile touched her lips, the first hint of warmth. It's nothing special, just vegetables. It takes a special skill to grow anything in this heat, Jacob said, meaning every word. Mine look like sad little rocks. The smile grew, just a little. The secret is to water them at dawn and dusk, and to sing to them sometimes. She blushed immediately, as if she'd revealed a shameful secret. I know that sounds foolish. Doesn't sound foolish at all, Jacob said, feeling a smile of his own. My horse Copper likes it when I sing on long rides. Calms him right down. For the first time, she looked directly at him. Her eyes met his, and Jacob felt a jolt. There was a whole universe in those eyes, a universe of unspoken thoughts and quiet dreams. "What do you sing to your horse?" she asked. "Old songs my mama taught me. Hymns, mostly. Sometimes a fiddle tune if I'm feeling brave." "I'd like to hear them sometime," she said, and then immediately looked away, horrified by her own boldness. "Maybe you will," Jacob replied gently. Hartwell cleared his throat, a loud, obnoxious sound. "Well, now that you've had your little chat, what's the decision, Thorne? Time is money." Jacob looked at Constance. She had gone perfectly still, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She was bracing for rejection. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the tension in her neck. Her entire life had been a preparation for this exact moment, being weighed, measured, and found wanting. "Miss Constance," Jacob said, his voice soft but carrying through the silent room, "would you do me the honor of taking a walk with me? I'd like to speak with you privately, if that's acceptable." Her surprise was so total, she forgot to hide it. Her jaw literally dropped. You want to talk to me?" "Yes, ma'am, very much." "There's no need for all this song and dance," Hartwell protested. "Just say yes or no." "The lady deserves a say in her own future," Jacob said, turning to face the older man. He was shocked by his own courage. This concerns her more than anyone. The words seemed to hit Constance like a physical force. She stared at Jacob as if he had just sprouted wings and flown around the room. Her expression was one of absolute stunned disbelief. Jacob wondered, when was the last time anyone in this house had asked Constance what she wanted? Had anyone ever? "I," she started, her voice barely a whisper. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, it was with a newfound strength. "Yes, I would like that very much." As they walked out into the late afternoon sun, leaving Samuel Hartwell scowling behind them, Jacob felt like he was stepping off a cliff. He had no idea where he was going to land, but for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he wasn't falling alone. The ranch yard was a symphony of end-of-day sounds, the lowing of cattle, the clatter of tools being put away, the sharp commands of the foreman. But for Jacob and Constance, it was as if they were walking in a pocket of perfect silence. When they were far enough from the house that no one could overhear, Jacob stopped. "Your father wants us to get married," he said, stating the brutal fact as plainly as he could. "I know," she replied. Her voice was steady, but he saw a slight tremor in her hands. "He told me this morning he had found someone willing to take me." The casual cruelty of it made Jacob's jaw clench. "Take me," like she was a stray dog. "Is that what you want?" he asked gently. "To be taken?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. For a moment the quiet, shy woman disappeared, and in her place was someone with fire in her eyes. "What I want has never mattered to anyone, Mr. Thorne. I am 23 years old. My father sees me as a burden to be discarded. You are a man in need of a wife and a dowry. If you are willing to marry me, I will do my best to be a good wife. I will cook and clean and not be a bother. That is the best I can promise." Her speech was rehearsed. He could tell she'd been preparing for a moment like this her whole life, the moment she would be sold off. "What if I told you," Jacob said slowly, "that what you want matters to me?" She stared at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and suspicion. She was trying to figure out the trick, the angle. People weren't kind without a reason. "I don't understand," she said. "It's simple. I'm asking you, not your father. Do you want to marry me? Not because you have to, not because it's a way out, but because you want to." Tears welled up in her eyes. She fought them, biting her lip, but they came anyway, silent tears that tracked paths through the dust on her cheeks. "Nobody's ever asked me that before," she whispered. "I'm asking now." She was quiet for so long that the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jacob thought he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd pushed too hard, offered a choice to someone who'd never been allowed to have one. Then she spoke, her voice so soft he had to lean in to hear it. I don't know you, Mr. Thorne. I cannot say I love you, but in the last 10 minutes you have treated me with more kindness and respect than my own father has in my entire life. You looked at me and saw a person, not a problem. She took a shaky breath and looked him right in the eye. If that is the kind of man you are, then yes, I would be honored to be your wife. The wedding, if you could call it that, happened 3 days later. It was a cold, joyless affair in the Hartwell parlor. A traveling preacher who smelled of whiskey presided. The only witnesses were Margaret, whose face was a storm of confusion and hurt, and two stone-faced ranch hands who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Constance wore a simple dress, an old one of her mother's that she'd altered herself. The ivory silk made her skin glow in the dim light. Jacob wore a borrowed shirt and boots he'd polished until his arms ached. When the preacher slurred the words, "Do you, Jacob Thorne, take this woman?" Jacob's voice was clear and strong. "I do." When he asked Constance, her "I do" was a whisper, but her hand was steady as she accepted the simple gold band he'd bought with the last of his savings. "You may kiss the bride." Jacob looked down at his new wife. This was it. The seal on a cruel bargain. He saw his own nervousness mirrored in her eyes. He leaned in, and their lips met for the first time. And something strange happened. A little spark. A flicker of warmth that was completely unexpected. It wasn't passion. It was recognition. A silent promise that maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be as bad as they both feared. The polite, scattered applause was broken by Samuel Hartwell stepping forward. He held out a thick envelope. "Your dowry," he said to Jacob, his voice loud and smug, making sure everyone heard. $200 to help you get started." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a malicious whisper. "More than enough for damaged goods." Jacob felt Constance flinch beside him as if she'd been struck, but he kept his face a neutral mask, taking the envelope. "Much obliged, Mr. Hartwell." "Don't thank me," Hartwell sneered. "Thank my generosity. But a word of advice. When you finally realize what a bad bargain you've made, don't come crying to me." The words hung in the air like a curse. On her wedding day, Constance was reminded, in front of everyone, just how little she was worth. The tiny spark of light Jacob had seen in her eyes just moments before was extinguished. "Well then," Jacob said, holding out his arm to his bride, "I guess we'd best be heading home." The wagon ride to Jacob's ranch took 4 agonizingly long hours. Constance sat beside him on the hard-wooden seat, as still and silent as a statue. Her few belongings were packed in a single trunk in the back. She hadn't spoken a single word since they left her father's house. She just stared at the endless horizon with the blank expression of someone walking to their own execution. "Are you all right?" Jacob finally asked when they stopped to water the horses. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was tight, brittle. "You don't have to pretend with me," Jacob said gently. "This isn't easy. For either of us." That was all it took. The dam broke. The tears she'd been holding back since the wedding, since her whole life maybe, finally came. They weren't loud, sobbing tears. They were quiet, hopeless tears that streamed down her face. "I'm sorry," she choked out, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you came for Margaret." Jacob climbed down from the wagon and walked around to her side. He looked up at her, this broken woman who was now his wife. "Can I tell you something, Constance?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Yesterday, in your father's office, I looked out the window and I saw you in the garden. You were just weeding, but you were so careful. You pulled the bad plants, but you did it gently so you wouldn't hurt the good ones. You paid attention to something small, something nobody else would even notice." She looked at him, completely bewildered. "It was just weeding." "No," Jacob said, his voice full of a conviction that surprised him. "It was caring. It was seeing value in things other people ignore. That tells me more about who you are than any pretty face or fancy dress ever could." She stared at him, her brown eyes wide with a dawning wonder, as if he'd just told her the sun rose in the west. You really saw that?" "I see a lot of things your father is blind to," Jacob said, "and I have a feeling I'm just getting started." They arrived at his ranch as the sun set, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and gold. The cabin was small, nestled in a little valley, but it was solid. A curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney. "It's not much," Jacob said, helping her down, "but it's mine. It's built to last." Constance walked around the cabin, her eyes taking in the neat garden plot, the sturdy barn, the small pasture where his 20 cows grazed. "You built all of this? Yourself?" "Every board, every stone," Jacob said with a quiet pride. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He could hear the shock in her voice. She had been expecting a hovel, a shack. Everyone had. Inside the cabin was one room, but it was clean and organized. Jacob had scrubbed it from top to bottom. A neighbor, the kindly Mrs. Patterson, had left a bouquet of wildflowers on the table and a fresh loaf of bread on the counter. Jacob set her trunk down by the small curtained-off area that served as the bedroom. He saw the worry in her eyes, the fear. She was thinking about what came next, about the wedding night, about the expectations of a husband. "I'll sleep in the loft," Jacob said quietly. "You take the bed. There's no pressure here, Constance, no expectations. We'll figure this out, one day at a time." The relief that washed over her face was so absolute that it almost broke his heart. What kind of life had this woman lived, that this small act of decency felt like a miracle? "Thank you," she whispered. That night, lying on a bed of hay sacks in the loft, Jacob listened to the quiet sounds of his new wife moving around below. He heard the rustle of cloth as she unpacked her trunk. He heard the soft thump of a book being placed on the nightstand. He had married a stranger. He had tied his life to a woman dismissed as worthless by the one man who should have cherished her. This was not how fairy tales were supposed to begin. But as he closed his eyes, he didn't see Margaret's fiery beauty. He saw Constance's hands in the garden, gently caring for living things. He saw the stunned hope in her eyes when he told her that her thoughts mattered. And Jacob thought, as sleep finally came, that maybe, just maybe, Samuel Hartwell hadn't given him a punishment after all. Maybe he'd given him a key, a crash, a sharp cry of pain. Jacob was awake instantly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scrambled down the ladder from the loft, his mind racing through all the terrible possibilities. A bear? An intruder? He found Constance standing in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the shattered pieces of a china plate. Blood was welling from a cut on her finger, dripping onto the clean wooden floor. His mother's plate, the last one he had. Tears were streaming down Constance's face. She was shaking. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I was trying to make you breakfast, and my hand slipped. I know it must have been special to you, and now it's ruined. I've ruined it." She was looking at him with sheer terror in her eyes, the terror of a child expecting a blow. Something inside Jacob snapped, not anger, something else. "Hey, hey," he said softly, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He didn't even look at the broken plate. He went right to her. "Let me see your finger." He took her hand. She flinched at his touch, a violent, full-body tremor, as if she expected him to crush her fingers. He held her hand gently, examining the cut. It was deep, but not terrible. "It's just a plate, Constance," he said, his voice firm but kind. She looked at him, her face a mess of confusion and tears. "But it was your mother's." "And you're my wife," he said, looking her right in the eye. "You are hurt. You are bleeding. You are terrified. Over a piece of baked clay that can't feel or think or care. Does that seem right to you?" She stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. You're not angry?" "No," he said, guiding her to a chair. "I'm not angry." He fetched the medicine box and carefully cleaned and bandaged her finger. The entire time she watched him, her eyes wide, searching his face for the rage she was so sure was coming. He wondered how many times she had been screamed at, or worse, for a simple accident. How many times had her father made her feel worthless over a spilled glass of milk or a dropped fork? "There," he said, tying off the bandage. "Good as new." He looked at the coffee pot on the stove, which was steaming. "Now, what were you trying to make?" "Pancakes," she said in a small voice. I I wanted to do something nice. I know you must be so disappointed with everything. He poured her a cup of coffee and set it in front of her. What makes you think I'm disappointed? Because you wanted Margaret, she said, the words blunt and full of pain. Everyone knows that, and you got me instead. It was a wall between them, a wall built of her father's cruelty and her own deeply buried shame. Jacob knew that if he didn't start taking that wall down, brick by brick, they would never have a chance. He sat down across from her. Constance, yesterday when you were unpacking, I saw something. You have 3 books of poetry, but you had them at the very bottom of your trunk, wrapped in an old shawl, like they were a shameful secret. Her coffee cup rattled in its saucer. Papa, Papa said that education was wasted on women. He said reading poetry just filled our heads with foolish ideas. Your papa, Jacob said quietly, was wrong. About a lot of things, especially about you. He helped her clean up the broken plate. He didn't treat it like a tragedy. He treated it like what it was, an accident. And with every piece he swept up, he felt like he was sweeping away a piece of the fear and sadness that clung to his wife like a shroud. They made breakfast together. He discovered that she moved in the kitchen with a quiet, practiced grace. She didn't need recipes. She knew by instinct how much flour to use, how much salt. She hummed while she worked, a low, sweet sound, the same sound he'd heard from the garden. You have a pretty voice, he said. She blushed. It's just noise. My mama used to say that humming was the soul's way of talking when it didn't have the words. She sounds like she was a wise woman, Constance said. She was, Jacob agreed. She would have liked you. She always said you could tell the true measure of a person by how they treated things that couldn't fight back. Like broken dishes? Constance asked, a tiny, hesitant smile on her lips. Like broken dishes, Jacob confirmed, and scared horses, and people who have been told their whole lives that they don't matter. Later that day, he showed her the rest of the ranch. The small, sturdy barn, the healthy cattle, the vegetable garden he'd struggled to maintain. Feel free to change anything, he told her. Plant whatever you want. Make it yours. Change things? She looked genuinely bewildered. But it's your ranch. It's our ranch now, he corrected her gently. Our home. The very idea seemed to overwhelm her. At her father's house, she had been an unpaid servant. The idea that she could have an opinion, that her desires might actually be considered, was utterly alien. That afternoon, while Jacob was out checking his fence lines, Constance explored the cabin. She found his small collection of books, practical manuals on farming and carpentry, but tucked among them were a few novels, and a worn, well-read book of poetry by Robert Burns. When Jacob returned at sunset, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, his book of poems open in front of her. The look on her face was one of rapt concentration. She looked peaceful, happy. Finding anything interesting? He asked. She looked up, startled, as if caught doing something wrong. You have Jane Eyre, she said, her voice full of wonder. I have wanted to read this my entire life. Papa said novels were foolishness for idle minds. It's a good one, Jacob said, hanging his hat by the door. Jane reminds me of someone I know, strong, smart, but constantly told she's not worth anything by people who are too blind to see the truth. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something new in her eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the first tentative flicker of hope. You really don't mind if I read your books? I'd be honored, he said. Maybe you could read to me sometime. That night, after a simple dinner of stew and fresh bread that tasted better than any meal Jacob had ever eaten, she did. She read from the book of poetry. Her voice, which was usually so quiet and hesitant, grew stronger as she read the words aloud. It filled the small cabin with a beauty and intelligence that Jacob had never known. He watched her by the light of the kerosene lamp, her face transformed by the story she was telling, and he realized something profound. Samuel Hartwell hadn't just been cruel to his daughter. He had been a fool. He had taken a diamond, a rare and precious gem, And because it was uncut and unpolished, he had mistaken it for a common stone. He had thrown it away, and Jacob had been the lucky man standing there to catch it. The scream was pure, gut-wrenching terror. It ripped through the crisp October air and sent a spear of ice through Jacob's heart. He dropped the axe he was using to split firewood and sprinted toward the corral. What he saw stopped him dead. Thunder, his prize bull, 2,000 pounds of muscle and horn, usually as gentle as a kitten, was in a rage. Head down, nostrils flaring, he was pawing the ground, his eyes wild with fury. And Constance was in the corral with him. But that wasn't the worst part. She wasn't running. She wasn't trying to climb the fence. She was standing perfectly still, directly in the bull's path. "Constance, get out of there!" Jacob screamed, his voice raw with panic. She didn't even look at him. Her focus was entirely on the massive, enraged animal just a few feet away. Then Jacob saw it. In the corner of the corral, his mare, Stella, was down. Her leg was tangled in a piece of loose fencing, and she was struggling, unable to get up. Constance was shielding the horse with her own body. "Don't move!" Jacob yelled, already vaulting the fence, his mind a white-hot blur of fear. But she did move. She took one step toward the bull. She spread her arms wide, making herself a bigger target. It was the craziest, bravest thing Jacob had ever seen. The bull charged. The ground shook. Jacob's heart stopped. This was it. He was going to watch his wife die. But just inches from her, Thunder skidded to a halt. He snorted a hot blast of air and shook his massive head, confused by this tiny, fragile creature that refused to show fear. "Easy now, boy," Constance murmured, her voice unbelievably calm. Jacob could hear it now, low and soothing. "Easy, Thunder. Nobody's going to hurt you. You're just scared. That's all it is." She slowly, so slowly, extended a hand. Jacob crept closer, his movements careful, trying not to make a sound that would spook the bull again. This was a delicate, impossible dance, and one wrong move would end in bloodshed. "That's a good boy," Constance crooned, her voice like a gentle song. "You remember me, don't you? I'm the one who brings you the sweet apples when Jacob isn't looking." The bull's ears flickered. A little of the madness left his eyes. He stretched his neck forward and sniffed her outstretched hand. Then he allowed her to touch his nose. Her fingers, Jacob saw now, were trembling, but her voice was steady as a rock. "There now," she whispered, stroking his forehead. "What has you so worked up, sweet boy?" And that's when Jacob saw it. A long, wicked piece of broken fence wire was embedded in the bull's shoulder. Every time he moved, the sharp metal dug deeper, driving him crazy with pain. "Constance," Jacob said, his voice quiet. "I see it. The wire. Can you keep him calm while I try to get it out?" She just nodded, never taking her eyes off the bull, never stopping the gentle stroking, the soft murmuring. Jacob circled around, his knife in his hand. He had one shot at this. If he startled the bull now, they were both dead. He took a deep breath, moved in quickly, and with one swift, practiced motion, he sliced the wire free. Thunder grunted, shook himself once, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, he was calm. The pain was gone. He looked at Constance, blinked his big dumb eyes, and then wandered off to graze as if nothing had happened. Jacob's knees felt weak. He leaned against the fence, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Constance was already by the injured mare's side, her hands moving expertly over the horse's tangled leg, checking for breaks. "How did you know?" Jacob asked, his voice shaking. "How did you know he was hurt, not just mean?" She didn't look up from her work. "Animals don't turn vicious for no reason," she said simply. "People do. Animals don't. I knew something was wrong, so I looked until I found it." "You could have been killed." "So could Stella," she replied, gently untangling the wire from the horse's leg. "And she was helpless." Jacob stared at his wife. This quiet, timid woman who apologized for breaking a dish had just faced down an enraged bull without a moment's hesitation. The courage, the sheer, raw nerve of it, was staggering. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked. "About animals." A shadow passed over her face. "Before my mother died, the animals were my only friends. The dogs, the barn cats, the horses. They didn't care if I was plain or quiet. They just wanted to be treated with kindness. She paused. After Mama died, Papa said I was spending too much time with beasts. He said it wasn't proper for a young lady. He forbade me from going to the barns. But you went anyway, Jacob guessed. A small, sad smile. Yes. Margaret used to cover for me. She'd tell Papa I was in my room reading the Bible. Another piece of the puzzle that was Constance fell into place. Her father had tried to crush this part of her too. This gift she had. This empathy for creatures that couldn't speak for themselves. He had tried to force her into a box. To make her into something she wasn't. But he had failed. In the 2 months since their wedding, Constance had slowly, carefully begun to blossom. She had transformed his simple garden into a work of art. She had made friends with their nearest neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, a kind, sturdy woman who treated Constance not as a burden, but as an equal. For the first time in her life, Constance had a friend, someone she could talk to, share recipes with, laugh with, and she had started to write. One evening, after dinner, she shyly handed him a folded piece of paper. It's a poem, she'd said, unable to meet his eyes. About the ranch. About us. It's probably no good. He'd read it, and it had taken his breath away. In morning light across the valley floor, two hearts learn what they're beating for. Not the love that burns like wildfire bright, but steady warmth through winter's night. She tends the garden, he mends the fence, building dreams from common sense. What started as a cruel man's jest becomes the thing they both love best. It's beautiful, he told her, his voice thick with emotion. Constance, it's perfect. You really think so? She'd whispered, a look of desperate hope on her face. I think, he'd said, that your father was wrong about everything. Now watching her gentle the frightened mare, seeing the quiet competence in her hands, he knew it was true. Samuel Hartwell hadn't just been wrong, he had been blind. He had possessed a treasure beyond price, and had been utterly incapable of seeing its worth. One evening, as the first chill of winter began to creep into the air, she surprised him. Jacob, she said, her voice hesitant, can I ask you something? Anything. I was thinking, would it be all right if I invited Margaret to come for Christmas? The question stunned him. After everything, she still had room in her heart for the sister who had been the source of so much of her pain. I know things are complicated, she continued, twisting her hands in her apron, but she's still my sister, and I think she's lonely, and maybe if she saw us, if she saw that I'm happy, really happy, it might help. Constance, he said, taking her hands in his. This is your home. You can invite anyone you want. The smile she gave him was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. It was radiant. Later that night, as he lay in the loft, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing below, Jacob reflected on the strange, winding path his life had taken. He had ridden to the Hartwell Ranch, seeking a fantasy, a beautiful, laughing girl who represented a life he could never have, and he had left with a reality, a quiet, courageous woman who was teaching him what it meant to build a life, not just dream of one. Samuel Hartwell had meant to give him an insult, a burden, a worthless, plain woman. Instead, without knowing it, the cruelest man in Wyoming had given Jacob Thorne the greatest gift of his life. And the real trouble hadn't even started yet. The gunshot cracked through the frozen December air like a whip. Jacob was chopping wood behind the cabin, and the sound sent his blood to ice. He looked up to see 3 riders coming down the valley trail, moving fast. Even from a distance, he recognized the man in the lead, Samuel Hartwell, and the 2 men with him weren't ranch hands. They were the kind of men you hired when you wanted a job done that the law wouldn't approve of. One was lean and scarred, with the dead eyes of a killer. The other was built like a bull, a brute with hands the size of dinner plates. Constance! Jacob yelled, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the cabin wall. Get inside, lock the door. But it was too late. She was already on the porch, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides. She had heard the shot, too, and she knew what it meant. Her father had come to collect his property. "Well, well," Hartwell called out, reining in his horse a stone's throw from the porch. His voice was full of false cheer. "Look at you, daughter. Married life seems to agree with you. You're standing up straighter than I've seen in years." "Papa," Constance said, her voice a tight whisper, "why are you here?" "Business," Hartwell said, his cold eyes shifting to Jacob. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding about the terms of your arrangement, Thorne. Time to set the record straight." Jacob stepped in front of his wife, the rifle held loosely but ready. "There was no misunderstanding. I married your daughter, fair and square." "Ah, but you see," Hartwell said, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket, "there's the matter of this promissory note you signed." The scarred man grinned, showing a row of yellow teeth. "A man should always read the fine print." "That was the dowry," Jacob said, his stomach sinking. He remembered signing a paper in Hartwell's office, but he'd been so dazed by the events he hadn't paid it much mind. "Was it?" Hartwell's smile was as sharp as a razor. "Or was it a loan? A loan of $200 to be repaid in 90 days? With, as it happens, my daughter listed as collateral." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. Collateral. He'd used Constance as collateral. "That's not legal," Constance said, her voice shaking with rage. "You can't treat a person like property." "Can't I?" Hartwell sneered. "You're my daughter. In the eyes of the law, you are mine until your husband proves he can provide for you. And since Mr. Thorne here has defaulted on his debt," the big man spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow, "we're here to repossess the collateral." Jacob's mind was spinning. The dowry money was gone. He'd invested it, buying more cattle, seed for the spring, supplies to get them through the winter. He had no cash, not $200. "I need more time," Jacob said. "When I sell the new calves in the spring—" "Time's up," Hartwell snapped. "I have a buyer for this whole valley, and he wants it empty. You can't pay, so the girl comes home with me." "Over my dead body," Jacob said, raising the rifle. Instantly, the two hired guns drew their pistols. The peaceful ranch yard became a standoff. 3 guns pointed at one. Jacob knew the odds. He was going to die, but he would die before he let them take her back to that house, back to that life. "Jacob, no!" Constance pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Don't. This is what he wants." "Listen to your wife, boy," Hartwell said. "She's the only one here with any sense. Come on, Constance. Pack your things." "I am home," she said, and her voice, though quiet, was filled with a strength that stunned Jacob. "This is where I belong." "Not according to this paper," the scarred gunman said. "A woman belongs where her man can afford to keep her, and this one can't." The insult, the casual dismissal of everything they had built, ignited a fire in Jacob's soul. "She is not a horse to be traded," he roared. "She is my wife." "Your wife?" Hartwell laughed, that same cold, humorless sound from his office. "You wanted the prize filly, but you couldn't afford her, so I gave you the broken-down nag from the back pasture. Don't pretend this is some grand romance. You settled for the scraps." He saw the words hit Constance. He saw her flinch, the old pain and insecurity flooding back into her eyes. For a second, she looked like the same terrified girl from her father's garden. But only for a second. Then something remarkable happened. She straightened her shoulders. She lifted her chin, and she stepped forward, deliberately placing herself between her husband and the 3 guns. "You're wrong, Papa," she said, and her voice rang with a clarity and power Jacob had never heard before. "Jacob didn't settle for scraps. He chose me. He saw something in me that you were too blind and too cruel to ever see." "Pretty words," Hartwell sneered. "They don't pay debts." "What if I could pay it?" A new voice. Everyone turned. Riding up the trail, her horse kicking up clouds of snow, was Margaret. She looked like an avenging angel, her red hair flying behind her face set with a grim determination. "Margaret!" Constance gasped. "I heard you talking, Papa," Margaret said, swinging down from her horse and stalking toward them. "I heard your plan. I couldn't let you do this." "This doesn't concern you, girl," Hartwell roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "Doesn't it?" Margaret reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. It jingled with the sound of gold coins. $200, Papa, for Jacob's debt, paid in full. Hartwell stared at the pouch as if it were a snake. Where did you get that? From my inheritance, Margaret said calmly. The money Mama left me. The money you were keeping safe for me until I found a suitable husband. Well, I've decided to invest it in my sister's happiness. Jacob was speechless. He looked at Margaret, at this beautiful woman he had once thought he loved, and saw a stranger, someone with a will of iron he'd never suspected. Why? He managed to ask. Margaret's eyes met his, and then she looked at her sister. Her expression was full of regret and a fierce, protective love. Because for months I've been watching you two, she said. I've seen how happy you are, Constance. I've seen the way he looks at you, like you're the sun and the moon. I've never seen you look so alive, so valued. She turned back to her father. And I've seen what kind of man Jacob really is. Not the worthless drifter you called him. He's a man who saw the treasure everyone else overlooked. He chose substance over surface. He chose my sister. You foolish girl, Hartwell bellowed, his face purple with rage. That money was for your future. No, Papa, Margaret said, her voice like steel. That money was to buy me a husband who would care more about your bank account than about me. I would rather be poor and loved for who I am than rich and treated like one of your prize heifers. The two hired guns looked at each other. This was getting too complicated. They were paid to intimidate, not to mediate a family war. The scarred man slowly holstered his pistol. If the debt's paid, Mr. Hartwell. Hartwell snatched the pouch of gold from Margaret's hand, his eyes blazing with hatred. This changes nothing. You are both still my daughters, and you will both regret this betrayal. We're not your property anymore, Papa, Constance said quietly. We're women, and we're choosing our own lives. Your threats don't work on us anymore. Hartwell stared at them, his two daughters united against him. He was defeated. He knew it. With a final venomous glare, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his two hired thugs trailing behind him like beaten dogs. The silence they left behind was filled with the sound of the wind sighing through the pines. Margaret, Jacob started, his voice thick. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me, Margaret said, pulling her sister into a fierce hug. Thank Constance. She's the one who taught me what courage looks like. The two sisters clung to each other, tears streaming down both their faces. Tears of relief, of reunion, of a lifetime of misunderstanding finally being washed away. I was so jealous, Margaret whispered into her sister's hair. Jealous that you found something real while I was trapped, waiting for someone to see past my face. You'll find it, Constance said, her voice firm, now that you know what to look for. Watching them, Jacob felt a profound sense of awe. Samuel Hartwell's cruelty was like a fire. He had meant for it to destroy them, to burn them down to ash. Instead, it had forged them. It had burned away the pettiness, the jealousy, the fear. It had left behind something pure and unbreakable. The man who thought he was a king, who believed his power was absolute, had just been defeated by the two people he had wronged the most. His worthless daughter and his beautiful daughter had discovered that their true value had nothing to do with him at all. It had everything to do with each other. The blizzard came without warning, a white monster that swallowed the world. For 3 days it howled. For 3 days the wind screamed like a banshee, shaking the small cabin to its foundations. Snow piled up in monstrous drifts, burying the fences, climbing the walls, isolating them completely. But it wasn't the storm that terrified Jacob. It was the fever. Constance was burning up. She lay in their bed, her skin frighteningly hot to the touch, her breath coming in shallow, rattling gasps. 1 minute she was shivering violently under a mountain of quilts. The next she was throwing them off, delirious and muttering things that made no sense. Her breathing is getting worse, Margaret said. Her face was pale and drawn, her usual vibrant beauty erased by days of sleepless worry. She had been trapped with them since the storm hit, and now she was their only hope. We have to get her to a doctor, Jacob said, his voice ragged with desperation. We'd never make it, Margaret stated the flat, terrible truth. The trail to town is impassable. We're on our own. Helpless. It was the worst feeling in the world. He was a strong man, a man who could build a house and tame a wild land, but he could do nothing against the sickness that was stealing his wife. The medicine chest, Margaret said, her voice suddenly sharp with purpose. What do you have? They went through his meager supplies: willow bark for fever, liniment for aches, a bottle of whiskey, a few bags of herbs Mrs. Patterson had given him, their purposes a mystery. Margaret picked up one of the bags and sniffed it. This is elderberry. Mama used to make a tea from it. She picked up another. And this is echinacea root. The Indian women swear by it for illnesses of the lung. Jacob stared at her. You know about this stuff? Some, she admitted, her hands moving quickly, confidently, sorting the herbs. Mama was the one everyone called when there was sickness. I used to help her. A bitter look crossed her face. Papa made me stop after she died. He said it was dirty work, not suitable for a lady. Another gift, another talent, crushed by Samuel Hartwell's ignorance and pride. What would your mother have done now? Jacob asked, his hope flickering back to life. Margaret was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant, remembering. She would have made a steam tent to help her breathe, then the elderberry tea. And, she hesitated, she would have used a mustard plaster on her chest. But they're dangerous if you do them wrong. Show me, Jacob said. For the next 24 hours, they fought for Constance's life. They worked as a team, a seamless unit fueled by desperation and love. Jacob kept the fire roaring, melted snow for water, and held Constance's hand, talking to her, telling her stories, begging her not to leave him. Margaret became a different person. The beautiful, charming socialite disappeared. In her place was a skilled, no-nonsense nurse. She mixed the herbs. She directed Jacob on how to make the plaster, her hands gentle but firm, her voice calm and reassuring. I'd forgotten how much I missed this, she confessed to Jacob in the dead of night, as they watched Constance's chest rise and fall. Feeling useful, for something other than being looked at. Why did you ever stop? Because Papa told me men didn't want a wife who smelled of poultices and sickness, she said, her voice laced with a bitterness that was years in the making. They wanted a wife who was an ornament. I believed him. Around dawn on the fourth day, the fever broke. Constance's eyes fluttered open. They were weak, but they were clear. She looked at Jacob, and a small, tired smile touched her lips. You look awful, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Relief hit Jacob so hard his knees buckled. You're one to talk, he choked out. You scared 10 years off my life. She saw her sister dozing in a chair by the bed. Margaret, what's she doing here? Saving your life, Jacob said simply. Constance reached out a weak hand and touched her sister's. Margaret woke with a start. Thank you, Constance whispered. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. I should have learned more. I should have paid more attention to Mama, instead of worrying about silly things. You remembered what mattered, Constance said, when it mattered most. The storm ended that morning. The world outside was a silent, pristine wilderness of white. When Jacob finally dug his way to the barn, he found the animals safe and sound. A small miracle. When he returned to the cabin, he found the two sisters sitting by the fire, talking quietly. There was a new seriousness in Margaret, a new sense of purpose. The crisis had burned away the last of her father's influence, revealing the strong, capable woman who had been hiding underneath all along. I'm not going back, Margaret announced when Jacob joined them. What do you mean? To Papa's house, to that life. It's not for me. She looked at Jacob and Constance, at the small, humble cabin filled with a love and respect her father's mansion had never known. I've spent my whole life waiting for a man to give my life meaning. But you two, you built your own meaning, together. Over the next few weeks, as Constance slowly regained her strength, Margaret blossomed. She started riding out to the neighboring ranches, using the knowledge she'd learned from her mother to help other families. She had a gift for it, a calling. Mrs. Patterson says I have a healer's hands, she told them one night, her eyes glowing with a pride Jacob had never seen in her before. That's wonderful, Constance said, her voice full of genuine joy for her sister's newfound purpose. There was no trace of the old jealousy, only love. I think, Margaret said thoughtfully, I need to make my own way. Prove to myself and to the world that a woman's worth isn't measured by the man she marries. Jacob watched her, filled with admiration. She was a Hartwell, through and through. Not the cruel, domineering Hartwell of her father, but the strong, resilient, intelligent Hartwell of her mother. That night, as Jacob and Constance lay in bed, she turned to him in the darkness. Do you think, she asked quietly, that we might have children someday? The question took him by surprise. Their life together had been a series of crises, one after another. They'd never had the luxury of planning for a future. Do you want them? He asked. I think so, she said. I would want to raise them differently, to teach them that their worth comes from inside. That kindness is more important than wealth, and courage is more important than beauty. I'd like that too, Jacob said, pulling her close. He held her, listening to the sound of her steady breathing, and thought about the impossible journey they had taken. He had come to the Hartwell Ranch for a prize, a beautiful trophy to prove his worth. Instead, he'd been given a partner, a quiet, unassuming woman who had saved him and their two families in more ways than he could count. Samuel Hartwell, in his infinite cruelty, had tried to give Jacob a punishment, but God, in his infinite wisdom, had answered Jacob's prayer. Not with the woman he thought he wanted, but with the woman he desperately needed. And the fire was coming. He could almost smell the smoke on the wind. The fire was a living beast. It roared and screamed, its orange tongue licking at the April sky, devouring the barn Jacob had spent 3 years building. He stood there helpless, a useless water bucket in his hand, watching his dreams turn to black smoke and ash. His cattle, terrified, scattered across the valley. The heat was a physical blow, pushing him back. The house! Constance's scream cut through the roar of the flames. Jacob! The roof! He spun around. A blizzard of burning embers, carried on the wind, was raining down on their small cabin. The dry wooden shingles were already starting to smolder. In a heartbeat, they would lose everything. Wet blankets! Jacob yelled, already sprinting for the water barrel. Margaret, get on the roof! The three of them fought like cornered animals. Jacob scrambled onto the roof, beating at the glowing embers with a soaked quilt, while the sisters formed a bucket brigade below. The smoke was thick, choking. The heat was blistering. Behind them, the barn groaned, sagged, and then collapsed in on itself with a deafening crash that sent a mushroom cloud of sparks into the night sky. The immediate danger to the cabin was over. They had saved it. But as Jacob climbed down, his body aching, his lungs burning, the full weight of the disaster crashed down on him. How? Margaret coughed, her face streaked with soot. How did it start? I don't know, Jacob said, his voice numb. It wasn't an accident. I checked everything this morning. No lanterns lit, hay was dry. A horse's whinny cut him off. A lone rider was approaching through the smoke-filled valley. Jacob's blood ran cold. He recognized the man. Tom Bradley, Samuel Hartwell's foreman, a man with a reputation for doing his boss's dirty work. Bradley reined in his horse just outside the circle of light from the smoldering ruins. He didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. Well now, he called out, a lazy grin spreading across his face. Looks like you folks have had a string of bad luck. Bradley, Jacob said, his voice deadly quiet. What are you doing here? The boss sent me, Bradley replied, his eyes gleaming with malice. Heard there was some trouble. Wanted me to check on his daughters, make sure they were safe. Terrible thing, a fire. Just comes out of nowhere sometimes. The implication was as clear as a confession. You did this, Constance said, her voice shaking with a rage so pure it was almost silent. Papa sent you to burn us out. Bradley chuckled. Now that's a mighty serious accusation, Mrs. Thorne. You can't prove a thing like that. Accidents happen, especially to people who don't know their place. Margaret stepped forward, her face a mask of fury. I know my father's methods, Tom. This has his smell all over it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Bradley shrugged, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. The point is, the message has been delivered. A smart man would take the hint, pack up, move on, before another accident happens. Get off my land, Jacob said, the words ground out from between his teeth. Bradley's grin widened. Or what, Thorne? You gonna shoot me? An unarmed visitor? That'd be murder. The law still applies, even out here in the dirt. He knew he was trapped. Bradley was baiting him, trying to provoke him into doing something stupid, something that would bring the sheriff down on him. Go, Constance whispered, her hand on Jacob's arm. Just go. Bradley laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound. Listen to the smart one, Thorne. He tipped his hat. Ladies! He wheeled his horse around and rode off, whistling a cheerful tune, leaving them standing in the smoking ruins of their life. For a long time, nobody spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the dying fire. We have to leave, Jacob said finally, the words tasting like ashes. He won't stop. Next time, it will be the house. It will be us. No. The word was spoken by Constance. It was quiet, but it was as solid and unmovable as a mountain. What do you mean, no? Jacob demanded, gesturing wildly at the devastation. Look around, Constance. We're ruined. The barn is gone, the tools, the feed, the winter hay. We have nothing. We have this land, she said, taking his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. We have this house, and we have each other. We don't run, Jacob. We don't let bullies win. She's right, Margaret said, her voice firm. My father thinks his money makes him a king. He thinks he can crush anyone who defies him. But he has enemies. People he's cheated. People he's bullied. They're afraid of him. But they're more afraid of letting a man like that win. Over the next few days, Margaret's words proved to be true. The community responded. News of the fire and of Bradley's suspicious visit spread like wildfire itself, and people started showing up. Mrs. Patterson arrived with a wagon full of food and her husband with a load of fresh-cut lumber. The Martinez family, who ran a small ranch to the south, brought tools and nails. Even Pete, the bartender from Dusty Creek, rode out with sacks of grain. Heard you had some trouble, Pete said, avoiding Jacob's eyes. A man can't stand by while his neighbors get burned out by rats. Jacob was overwhelmed. I can't pay you for this. Didn't ask for pay, Pete grunted. This is about what's right. Hartwell's got money. But you, son, you've got friends. It was a barn raising born from defiance. The entire community, it seemed, came together. Men who barely spoke to each other worked side by side, hammering and sawing. Women brought food and organized the work crews. They were not just rebuilding a barn, they were making a statement. And at the center of it all was Constance. The quiet, shy woman Jacob had married was gone. In her place was a leader. She directed the volunteers with a calm efficiency that amazed everyone. She organized the meals. She bartered for supplies. She kept spirits high with her quiet, unshakable resolve. Where did this come from? Jacob asked her one evening, as they watched the new barn frame rise against the twilight sky. This general, ordering troops into battle. She smiled, a tired but deeply happy smile. I don't know. I guess I never had anything worth fighting for before. At Papa's house, my only job was to be invisible. But this, she looked at the half-built barn, at the faces of their friends illuminated by lantern light. This is our home, our life. It's worth fighting for. You're not the same woman I married, Jacob said in wonder. Good, she replied, because you're not the same man. The man I married would have run. He would have let my father win. She was right. The man who had begged for Margaret's hand would have been broken by this. But his wife's quiet strength had become his own. Her courage had become his courage. Her father hadn't just failed to break them. He had made them stronger than he could ever imagine. A month later, the new barn was finished. It was bigger and stronger than the old one. The celebration that followed was the biggest gathering the valley had ever seen. As fiddle music played and people danced under the stars, Jacob stood with Constance, watching the happy scene. He saw Margaret laughing and talking with the Newtown doctor, a kind young man who seemed to see not just her beauty, but her fierce intelligence and compassionate spirit. He saw his neighbors, people from all walks of life, united by a common decency. He pulled his wife close. Your father made a terrible mistake. He's made a lot of them, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. He thought that by destroying our barn, he would destroy us, Jacob said. Instead, he showed us what we're really made of. He's all alone in that big, cold mansion with his money and his hate, and we are here, surrounded by all of this. He looked down at his wife, at the woman his father-in-law had called plain prairie dirt. He saw the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the quiet courage in the set of her jaw, the deep, unwavering love she had for him, for their home, for the life they had built from the ashes. And Jacob knew, with a certainty that filled his entire being, that this was the most beautiful woman in the entire world. He also knew the war wasn't over. A man like Samuel Hartwell doesn't accept defeat. He just changes tactics. The next attack wouldn't be with fire. It would be with words, and it would be far more dangerous. The town meeting was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Every rancher, every shopkeeper, every citizen of Dusty Creek was crammed into the sweltering schoolhouse. The air was thick with sweat and suspicion, and Samuel Hartwell was at the center of it, a spider spinning a web of lies. He stood before the crowd, his face a mask of righteous fury, and pointed a trembling, accusing finger directly at Jacob. "This man," Hartwell declared, his powerful voice filling the room, "is a danger to us all. He came here with nothing, a violent drifter who forced his way into my family. And now he seeks to poison our community with his radical ideas, turning neighbor against neighbor." A murmur went through the crowd. Hartwell had called this meeting, using his influence with the town council. He had spent weeks preparing, spreading rumors, calling in favors, twisting the truth until it was unrecognizable. Jacob felt Constance's hand find his. Her grip was firm, a small anchor in a raging sea. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Hartwell," said Mayor Collins, a weary but fair man. "You'd better have proof." "Oh, I have proof," Hartwell said with a smug smile. He produced a thick file of papers. "I have here sworn statements about his drunken brawling." He held up a paper. "Testimony about his attempts to organize the smaller ranchers into a union against established landowners like myself." He held up another. "And I have financial records showing he is a man who lives on debt and borrowed time." Dr. Harrison, the young doctor who had become sweet on Margaret, stood up. "This is a character assassination, not a town meeting. These are baseless slanders." "Sit down, Doc," yelled one of Hartwell's cronies. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us." It was Mrs. Patterson, her voice shaking with anger. "I've lived here 30 years, and I have never seen a man use his wealth to so wickedly persecute an honest family." The room erupted. People started shouting, taking sides. The community was being torn in two, right before Jacob's eyes. This was Hartwell's true plan. If he couldn't burn them out, he would make them outcasts. "Order!" the mayor yelled, banging his gavel. "Mr. Thorne, you will have a chance to respond." Jacob stood up. Every eye in the room was on him. This was it, the final battle. "I'm not a man for fancy speeches," Jacob began, his voice quiet but steady. "So I'll just tell you the truth." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his friends, his neighbors. "Mr. Hartwell is right about one thing. I came here with nothing but 40 acres of rock and a dream." He took a deep breath. "He's also right that I came to his ranch asking to marry his daughter Margaret." A gasp went through the crowd. Jacob glanced at Margaret, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. "I thought that was what I wanted. I was a fool, because the greatest thing that ever happened to me was when Samuel Hartwell, as an act of pure cruelty, offered me his other daughter instead." He turned to look at his wife. "He meant it as an insult. He called her plain, worthless, a burden. He thought he was giving me a punishment, but he was wrong. He gave me a gift beyond measure." His voice grew stronger, filled with a passion that came from the very core of his soul. "You want to know what kind of man I am? Don't ask him. Ask the Martinez family, who I helped bring in their harvest when their father was injured. Ask Mrs. Patterson, whose roof I helped patch after the big storm last spring. Ask Pete, whose saloon we all helped rebuild. That's the truth of a man's character. Not lies on a piece of paper, but the work of his hands and the loyalty of his friends. And as for being a troublemaker," a fire lit in Jacob's eyes, "I plead guilty. I believe that a man should be paid a fair wage for a day's work. I believe that the powerful shouldn't be allowed to bully the weak. I believe a community is only as strong as its willingness to help its most vulnerable members. If that makes me a dangerous man, then I am proud to be dangerous. The room was silent for a moment, and then applause broke out. It started with Pete and Mrs. Patterson, but it spread. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough. Then Constance stood up. A hush fell over the entire room. Constance Hartwell Thorne never spoke in public. She stood beside her husband, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking directly at her father. "My father," she began, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the schoolhouse, "told me my whole life that I was worthless. He told me I was plain, a burden. He told me that no man would ever want me, and I should be grateful for any scraps of attention I received." Tears were in her eyes, but her voice did not break. "He taught me to be ashamed of who I was, to be quiet, to be invisible." She paused, and then she turned her head and smiled at Jacob. It was a smile of such profound love and gratitude that it took the breath away. "Then I married this man, and he taught me that everything my father told me was a lie. He taught me that my quietness was not weakness, but strength. He taught me that my thoughts had value. He taught me that I was not a burden to be endured, but a partner to be cherished." She turned back to her father, and the fire in her eyes matched her husband's. "You gave me to Jacob as a cruel joke. You thought you were punishing us both. But you didn't. You freed us. You freed me from your shadow, and you gave this good man a love he never knew was possible." She looked out at the faces of her neighbors. "We are not rich. We are not powerful. But we are honest. We are kind. And we are not afraid of you anymore." She looked back at her father one last time, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but a whisper that carried the weight of a final judgment. "You taught me to be ashamed, Papa, but Jacob taught me to be proud, and that is why your lies and your money and your hate can never touch us again." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a truth so pure and so powerful that it left no room for argument. Samuel Hartwell stood there, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He had come here to destroy them with lies, and they had defeated him with the simple, undeniable truth. He had lost. Not just the vote, not just the argument. He had lost everything. His power, his respect, his daughters. He was just a rich, lonely, bitter old man. Mayor Collins cleared his throat. "Well," he said, looking at Hartwell with open contempt, "I don't think we'll be needing a vote after all." As the crowd began to file out, people came up to Jacob and Constance. They clapped them on the back. They shook their hands. They offered words of support, of admiration. They were no longer outcasts. They were the heart of the community. Jacob watched Margaret go to the young doctor, their hands finding each other naturally. He saw the future in their eyes, a future built on the lessons they had all learned. He turned to his wife, this incredible, courageous woman who had faced down every demon, from an angry bull to an even angrier father, and had won. "What started as a cruel man's jest," he whispered, quoting her poem, "she finished it for him, her eyes shining with tears of joy, becomes the thing they both love best." He pulled her into his arms, right there in the middle of the schoolhouse, and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate hope, like on their wedding day. It was a kiss of triumph, a kiss of certainty, a kiss that promised a lifetime of sunrises, of mended fences and tended gardens, of building a dream not from common sense, but from the most uncommon love he had ever known. Samuel Hartwell thought he was delivering the ultimate insult, but in the end, he had delivered a miracle. He had taken two people the world had called worthless, and by trying to crush them, he had shown them their infinite value. And in doing so, he had proven, once and for all, that the greatest treasures are often the ones that everyone else has thrown away. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments, what do you think is the true measure of a person's worth?